The cargo numbers never lied. That was the one thing Rena Solis trusted on Station Viros. She had arrived 8 months ago with a duffel bag, a work contract, and the kind of calm that comes from growing up where the ground sometimes shook without warning. The Andes had taught her that. Altitude sickness, landslides, predators moving through the fog at night. None of it was personal. It just was. You adapted or you didn't. Rena had always adapted. Station Viros was different from Earth in almost every way. The air tasted like recycled metal. The corridors were too tall and too white. 7 species moved through its halls daily, and humans were the newest and the smallest presence among them. 32 workers on probationary contracts, allowed to operate in the logistics wing under what the Galactic Transit Authority called supervised integration. What it actually meant was that humans carried, sorted, tracked, and loaded while the Solhari staff sat at the terminals and took credit for the numbers. Rena did not complain about this. Not because she had no opinion. She had many opinions. She kept them in a neat row inside her chest, the way you keep tools, organized, ready, and used until the right moment. The logistics hall ran 3 shifts. Rena worked the second. By the time she arrived each morning, the first shift had left a trail of unsorted manifests and misrouted container tags that she spent the first hour untangling. She did not mind. It gave her something to do before Dorvin arrived. Dorvin was the senior aide assigned to oversee human worker performance. He was Solhari, long-limbed, light-boned, with pale gray skin and the kind of calm authority that came from never having been told no. He wore his rank badge on his left shoulder and spoke to humans the way someone speaks to a piece of equipment that has started making a new noise, with focused irritation rather than interest. He had been calling Rena by the wrong name since her 3rd week on the station. Not a mistake. He knew her name. She had corrected him twice, politely. He had nodded both times and continued. After the 2nd time, she stopped correcting him. Her coworker and only close friend on the station, Bryn Calloway, had watched this with growing discomfort. "You should file a report," Bryn said once, sorting containers beside her. "On what grounds?" Rena asked. "He does on purpose." Proving purpose takes time and attention I don't have. She scanned a manifest, found an error, fixed it without pausing. 6 more months on contract. Then I can go home and sleep in air that doesn't taste like a filter. Bryn had laughed at that, and the subject was dropped. But it was not forgotten. What Rena had learned about the Solhari in 8 months was that they were not cruel by nature. Most of the lower-ranking staff were polite, even careful around the humans. They asked questions sometimes, quiet ones, curious ones, about Earth's gravity, about weather, about why human bones were so dense compared to their own. There was genuine interest there, buried under layers of professional distance. Dorvin was not most of the lower-ranking staff. He had a way of making the humans feel like they existed on a different level of the station, not just organizationally, but fundamentally. When he spoke in group briefings, he addressed the Solhari staff by name and the humans as a category. When reports were submitted, he routed them through his own terminal before they reached Counselor Orith, and by the time they arrived, they no longer carried the name of the person who had written them. Rena had written 4 reports in 8 months. None of them had her name on them when they reached the council log. On the day that mattered, the morning shift had left a worse mess than usual. 3 container routes had been flagged incorrectly, and 2 cargo holds were listed as empty when they were not. Rena worked through it in silence, made the corrections, logged everything properly, and had the hall organized before Dorvin arrived. That afternoon, there was a cultural briefing, a standard interspecies meeting held once a month where senior staff reviewed protocols. Rena and Bryn stood near the back. The Solhari staff filled the central rows. Dorvin was presenting. He spoke smoothly, with the confidence of someone who had been listened to his whole life. Halfway through the briefing, a young Solhari clerk named Steven, new to the station, barely past his first month, dropped his data pad. It hit the floor with a sharp sound that cut through the room. Everyone looked. Steven bent to pick it up, his thin hands trembling. Dorvin stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly and looked at Steven the way you look at something that has interrupted something important. Then he said, in a flat voice that carried clearly, that Steven's handling of basic equipment was consistent with the standard we have come to expect from those who lack discipline. He paused, looked at the humans at the back of the room, and added, "Much like our temporary additions." A few of the Solhari staff looked away. No one spoke. Steven stared at the datapad in his hands. His knuckles were pale. Rena watched all of this. She said nothing, but her jaw was tight, and in her chest, the row of tools she kept organized and ready shifted, one of them moving slightly forward, out of line, almost within reach. 6 more months, she told herself. She believed it then. The rerouting assignment came in at the start of the second shift, flagged urgent and read across every terminal in the logistics hall. 3 major cargo lines had overlapped due to a scheduling error in the upper dock. If nothing was done within 2 hours, 14 containers of medical supplies bound for the Vethani outer stations would miss their transfer window by 6 hours, a delay that, according to the priority codes attached to the manifest, could affect active relief operations. Rena had seen the conflict the night before. She had not been asked to look at it. She had been closing out her shift logs when the preliminary routing data crossed her screen, and something in the numbers had not sat right. She had stayed an extra 40 minutes, cross-referencing the dock schedules against the cargo priority codes across 3 separate systems, and she had worked out a clean solution. A reassignment of 2 loading bays and an adjusted departure window for the 3rd line would solve the entire conflict without delaying any other shipment. She had saved it to the shared logistics file, labeled it clearly, and gone back to her quarters. When she walked into the hall the next shift and saw the red flag on every terminal, she went to the shared file to confirm her solution was still there. It was untouched. She pulled it up, reviewed it one more time, confirmed it was correct, and began preparing to implement it. She was 3 steps into the process when Dorvin walked past her terminal, glanced at her screen, and stopped. He did not say anything to her. He picked up her datapad, her work, her open file, her labeled solution, looked at it for about 10 seconds, and walked toward the front of the hall where Counselor Orth had arrived for the morning review. Rena watched him walk away with her work in his hand. She did not move. She stood at her terminal and watched. Dorvin reached Orth and presented the solution clearly and efficiently. He spoke about the bay reassignment and the adjusted departure window as though the logic had arrived in his own head that morning. He did not look back toward Rena. He did not mention her name, her file, or the fact that she had stayed late to build what he was now describing. Counselor Orth listened, nodded, and approved the plan. Then Dorvin said something else. Rena was close enough to hear it clearly. Dorvin turned slightly toward Orth and said, in the unhurried tone of someone sharing a well-established fact, that while the logistics hall was functioning adequately, the human workers do not have the cognitive structure for strategic work. They are best suited for manual tasks, and expecting more than that creates inefficiencies. Bren, standing 2 steps to Rena's left, put his hand quietly on her arm. Rena did not move. Orth made a small sound of acknowledgement and moved on to the next item. Dorvin turned from the counselor and began walking back through the hall. He passed several Sulhari staff. He passed a Vethani clerk. He passed Bren. Then he stopped in front of Rena. He looked at her the way someone looks at a closed door, noting it, deciding it is not worth opening. "You should be grateful," he said, "that we allow your kind to work here at all." Something in the hall went very quiet. Not silence. The terminals were still running. The distant docking sounds still hummed through the walls, but the human quality of the space changed. The Sulhari staff nearby found other places to look. Steven, the young clerk, stood frozen at his station. Rena said nothing. Dorvin glanced down at the datapad in his hand, her datapad still showing her work, and with one small, contemptuous movement, he held it out toward her and let it drop. It hit the floor. The sound was small, clean, final. 8 months. 8 months of correcting his errors quietly. 8 months of watching her name disappear from her own reports. 8 months of wrong names and look-through eyes and standing at the back of rooms while her work was presented by someone who could not have produced it. 8 months of carrying patience the way you carry weight at altitude, breathing around it, adjusting your posture, pretending your lungs are not burning. The data pad hit the floor, and something in Rena's chest simply stopped calculating. Her hand moved. One slap. Open palm. Flat and fast and final. The sound of it was louder than she expected. It cracked through the logistics hall like something had broken open, which she supposed something had. Dorvin staggered. He did not fall, but his head snapped to the side, and he took 2 uneven steps backward, one hand going his face. For a Solhari, with light bones and no history of contact like that in professional space, it was more than a slap. It was something that had no category in his experience. The entire hall was silent now. Truly silent. Every terminal, every hand, every breath. Rena stood where she was. Her heart was beating hard, but her hands were steady. She felt, with unexpected clarity, the kind of calm that follows something long overdue. She looked at Dorvin. He was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on a Solhari face before. It was not pain. It was not anger. It was shock that something had happened that he had genuinely never considered possible. Station security was already moving through the door. Rena did not run. She reached down, picked up her data pad, and held it at her side. She waited. The holding corridor was not a cell. That was the first thing the Vethani security officer said to Rena when she brought her in. This is not a detention cell. You're not under arrest. You are in a restricted holding area pending formal review. She said it carefully, like someone reading from a card they hoped they would not need. Rena sat down on the bench along the wall and folded her hands in her lap. The corridor was narrow and white, with one small window that looked out onto a maintenance shaft. Not the drifting stars or the cargo haulers. Just pipes and gray metal and a yellow light that blinked every few seconds. Rena looked at it for a while. Then she looked at the floor. The security officer, a Vethani named Ossel, broader and darker than the Solhari, with 4-fingered hands and careful eyes, stayed in the corridor with her rather than leaving. Rena noticed that. It was not standard procedure for a restricted holding area. It was a choice. After a few minutes, Ossel said, "You understand why this is complicated." "Yes," Rena said. "Physical contact between species during a professional dispute. I know the code," Rena said. "Not sharp, just flat. I read it when I arrived. Clause 12, Section 3. Grounds for individual expulsion and review of collective contract status." Ossel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 32 workers. "I know," Rena said. She did know. She had known at the moment her hand moved, in the same distant part of her mind that keeps counting even when the rest of you has stopped caring about the numbers. 32 humans on the station. 32 contracts. 32 people eating recycled air meals and sending money home and counting down their remaining months. She had not thought about them before the slap. That was the honest truth. She had thought about the data pad on the floor and 8 months of carrying patience and the specific look on Dorvin's face when he dropped it. She had not calculated consequences in that moment. She had simply acted, and now she sat in a corridor that was not a cell, and she carried the weight of what 32 people would do when they found out. Ossel left briefly and came back with the look of someone who had received information they were not happy about. She told Rena that Dorvin had filed a formal charge within 20 minutes of the incident. He was requesting full individual expulsion and a suspension of all human worker contracts, pending review of the probationary integration program. He wants all of them gone, Rena said. He is requesting a review, Ossel said carefully. The suspension is standard while the charge is active, but they can't work. Not until the review is resolved. Rena nodded slowly. She thought about Bren. He had been in the hall when security arrived. He had not done anything, said anything, moved from where he was standing. He had just watched her be walked out, and the last thing she had seen was his face. Not angry, not panicked, just very still. She thought about the others too. The woman on third shift who sent half her contract pay to her mother in Lagos. The 2 brothers from rural Poland who shared a quarters unit and had been the ones to teach Rena which recycled food options were tolerable and which were not. The older man from coastal Japan who had worked galactic logistics for 11 years and knew more about interspecies cargo routing than anyone on the station, Solhari or otherwise, but who had never once been given a terminal assignment above manual level. 32 people. The yellow maintenance light blinked. Rena breathed. About an hour into her wait, The door to the corridor opened briefly and then closed again almost immediately. In that small space of time, Steven stepped inside. He was not supposed to be there. That was clear from the way he moved, fast, quiet, checking over his shoulder before letting the door close behind him. He stood in front of Rena and looked at her with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing something and is no longer sure it is the right thing to say. Rena waited. "There are others," Steven said quietly. "Lower staff, who saw the whole thing. The terminal logs captured the footage. All of it. Not just the contact. Everything before it." Rena looked at him. His hands were still. He had stopped trembling, she noticed, since the briefing the day before. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not doing it because I owe you." He paused. He has done this to others. Not the same way, but the same type of thing. Taking work. Saying things. "I have been in this station for 6 weeks, and I have already seen it 4 times. He stopped. "I'm going to submit an account to the review board." Rena looked at him for a long moment. "That might cause problems for you." "Yes," Steven said simply. Then he left. Rena sat alone again. 2 hours after that, Counselor Orith announced a formal review. The charge was filed. The footage was tagged. And word moved through the station the way bad news always does. Faster than it should, quieter than it deserves. When Bren heard that the contracts were suspended, he sat down in the middle of the logistics hall floor and did not get up for a long time. Nobody told him he had to. Counselor Orith had been running interspecies review chambers for 19 years. She had mediated contact violations, resource disputes, translation errors that had nearly become diplomatic incidents, and one memorable case where a Vethani docking crew and a Solhuri inspection team had managed to file charges against each other simultaneously for the same 30-second window of time. She had seen most things. She had not seen anything quite like this. The review chamber was a wide oval room on the administrative level, with low lighting and a central display screen that could render footage from any logging system on the station. Orith sat at the head of the long table. Dorvin sat to her left with his legal aide, a senior Solhuri named Revath. Rena sat to her right, alone. Ossel stood near the back wall. 3 council observers filled the far seats. Dorvin had submitted his account. It was detailed, formal, and described the incident as an unprovoked physical assault on a senior staff member by a probationary human worker with a history of insubordinate behavior. The word unprovoked appeared 6 times. Revath spoke first on Dorvin's behalf. He was efficient and calm. "The code was clear," he said. "Physical contact during a professional dispute, regardless of context, regardless of provocation, was a violation. The only question before the council was the severity of the response. He recommended full individual expulsion and formal suspension of the Human Integration Program, pending a complete review." Then the footage was played. Orith had seen the timestamp log before the meeting. She had not watched it in full. She watched it now, the same as everyone in the room. The hall recording started well before the moment of contact. It showed Rena at her terminal. It showed her existing solution already open on the screen. It showed Dorvin walking past, picking up the datapad, and walking away without a word to her. It showed him standing before Orith, presenting the work, his voice clear on the audio log. It showed him making his comment about cognitive structure. It showed him walking back. It showed him dropping the datapad. The room was very quiet when that part played. Revath cleared his throat and said that while Dorvin's conduct could be reviewed separately, it did not change the fundamental legal question of physical contact. Ossel spoke from the back of the room. She did not wait to be recognized. She said that under Clause 7 of the Interspecies Conduct Framework, deliberate physical dismissal of another party's property during a professional dispute constituted a form of contact initiation. Dorvin had introduced physical action first. Rena's response, while outside protocol, had a defensible classification as responsive contact under provocation, which carried a significantly different consequence than unprovoked assault. Revath said that Clause 7 applied to direct contact with a person, not objects. Ossel said that was one interpretation and that the Conduct Board had ruled otherwise in 2 prior cases. They went back and forth. Orith listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she looked at Rena and asked if she had anything to say. Rena had been sitting with her hands flat on the table, watching the legal exchange the way she watched cargo numbers, tracking it, measuring it, not reacting to it. When Orith asked, she did not stand. She just looked at the counselor directly and spoke. "I spent 8 months learning your rules," she said. "I read the code when I arrived. I read the conduct guidelines. I read the integration protocols. I followed every one of them. When he took my work, I followed the rules. When he used the wrong name, I followed the rules. When he talked about my species in the way he did, I followed the rules." She paused. "You don't have a rule for what he did because you never thought anyone would do it to one of us. You designed the code for species you already understood. We were new. Nobody wrote anything down for us." Silence. Then Orith said, "Is there anything else?" Rena said no. Orith turned back to the table. She was about to speak when one of the council observers passed her a document on a data pad. She read it. Then she read it again. It was a written account submitted to the review board by Steven, junior clerk, Station Viros, submitted that morning on his own initiative without being asked or summoned. It detailed 6 months, not his own 6 weeks, but 6 months of compiled observations from multiple shifts, drawn from conversations with other lower-ranking Solhari staff who had worked under Dorvin. Incidents of credit removal. Incidents of deliberate misdirection. A pattern of behavior toward human workers that was specific, consistent, and well-documented. Steven had not just written what he saw. He had asked others what they had seen. He had compiled it. He had signed his name to all of it. Orith read the document a 3rd time. Revath asked what the document was. Orith told him. Revath said it was irrelevant to the charge at hand. Dorvin, for the first time in the review, said nothing. He was looking at the table. Orith set the document down and said that the case had grown beyond the scope of the station review. She was referring the matter to the Galactic Conduct Board. This was not what Dorvin had come to the room expecting. It was not what Revath had prepared for. It was also, Rena understood as she sat there, no longer just about her. Something had opened, and it was not going to close quietly. 3 days is a long time when you have nothing to do. The human workers were not confined. They could move freely through their assigned areas of the station, quarters, the crew room, the shared dining corridor, the observation deck on level 4. They just could not work. Their terminal access was suspended. The loading bays were reassigned to Solhari manual staff in the interim. The humans existed on Station Viros for 3 days the way furniture exists, present, taking up space, not being used. Rena spent most of the time in the small human crew room. It was a narrow space with 6 chairs, a food unit, and a window that looked out toward the docking ring. Someone had stuck a small paper flag to the corner of the window at some point. A faded thing, handmade, Earth's rough outline on a scrap of paper. Nobody knew who had put it there. Nobody took it down. Brent played cards with her. They did not talk much. He had a way of sitting with bad situations that Rena had come to appreciate. He did not fill the silence with reassurance he did not mean. He just stayed. On the 2nd day, others came. Not all at once. One at a time. Throughout the afternoon, various workers found reasons to stop by the crew room. Some brought food. Some just sat down. A woman named Adiz, who worked 3rd shift loading and who sent half her contract pay to her mother in Lagos every cycle, sat across from Rena and looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said quietly, "I've been here 2 years. He called me the wrong name for 14 months. After a while, I stopped noticing. I think that was the worst part. I stopped noticing." Rena did not know what to say to that. She did not try to say anything. A man named Peter, one of the brothers from Poland, told her that he had submitted a formal complaint about Dorvin's behavior 9 months ago through the standard channel. He had received an automated acknowledgement and nothing else. He had assumed that was the end of it. The older man from Japan, Hideo, who had more experience in galactic logistics than anyone on the station, sat down in the corner chair and said only, "You did what the rest of us calculated the cost of and did not do." He did not say whether he thought she was right or wrong. He just said that. One person, a younger worker from West Africa on his first contract, came in and started to say that she had ruined everything. Bryn stood up. The younger worker looked at Bryn, then at Rena, then sat down instead and said nothing else. By the end of the hour, he was playing cards with them. Rena sat through all of it. At night, after everyone had gone back to their quarters, she sat alone and looked at the paper flag on the window. She thought about what Bren had asked her the first evening, direct, in a way that only people who know you well can be. He had asked, "Did you do it for them or for yourself?" She had thought about it honestly. The answer was both, and she had told him so. He had said that on Earth, that was usually how it worked. People did things for themselves that also turn out to be for others, or they did things for others that turn out to also be for themselves, and the line between the two was not always clean. He said that was probably not specific to humans. He said it was probably just specific to anyone who had ever been pushed far enough. On the morning of the third day, Delegate Yura arrived. She came in on an emergency transit, and the first thing she did was review the full footage and all submitted accounts before she spoke to anyone. She was a senior human diplomat attached to the Galactic Council, short, precise, with gray-streaked hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had sat across from difficult situations for a very long time. She met with Rena privately in the crew room. She did not start with comfort. She said, "You did not help us politically. The timing is bad. There are 3 pending human integration proposals at the council level that are now being used as context for this incident by people who are already looking for reasons to stall them." Rena nodded. "But," Yura said, "you may have helped us in a way that politics does not reach easily." She set a document down on the table. "I have reviewed Steven's account and cross-referenced it with the automated complaint log. Peter's complaint 9 months ago was not lost. It was filed and then rerouted away from Orith's desk into a general review queue that Dorvin had standard access to manage." Rena was still for a moment. "He buried it." "We believe so. And Peter is not the only one." Yura looked at her. "I am filing a formal countercomplaint on behalf of the Human Workers Collective. It is the first one ever filed by humans against a senior Solhari Station official in this district." She paused. "Dorvin's aide resigned from his case this morning." Rena looked at the paper flag in the window. "How are the others?" Yura asked. Rena thought about Adiz and Peter and Hideo sitting in the corner chair, and the young man who had almost said the wrong thing and then stayed to play cards. "They're doing what people do," she said. "They're getting through it." Yura nodded. "That is usually enough." The Galactic Conduct Board sent its preliminary ruling on the 4th morning. Rena was in the dining corridor with Bryn when the notification came through on the shared station feed. They were the only ones there. Bryn had a cup of something warm that was meant to approximate coffee and did not quite manage it. Rena had not eaten yet. Neither of them had been sleeping well. The ruling notification was short. Formal language, as most of these things were. Rena read it twice to make sure she understood it correctly, then passed the datapad to Bryn and watched his face while he read it. The physical contact charge against Rena Solis was reclassified from unprovoked assault to responsive contact under provocation. This carried no expulsion. It carried a formal conduct note on her work record, something that could be reviewed and contested. Yura had already told her, and that had strong ground for removal given the documented provocation. The suspension of the 32 human worker contracts was lifted immediately. Dorvin was placed under formal investigation by the Galactic Conduct Board, with a preliminary finding that the evidence suggested a sustained pattern of misconduct toward probationary workers across multiple species, not only human staff. The investigation was expected to take several months. Bryn put the datapad down and breathed out slowly. "Okay," he said. "That was all." They finished their food, or what passed for food, and went to the logistics hall. The hall looked the same as it always had. Same terminals, same container flow, same distant hum of the docking ring through the walls. The recycled air tasted like a metal filter the way it always did. The light overhead had the same slight flicker on the left side that maintenance had been promising to fix for 3 months. But it was not the same. Rena noticed it within the first 10 minutes. The Solhari staff, who had always moved past the human workers without acknowledgement, not rudely, not deliberately, just without registering them as people who warranted a look, were different now. Not all of them. Some were exactly the same, but several were not. A terminal operator 2 stations down from Rena glanced over and nodded when she sat down. Not a big thing. A small thing. The kind of small thing that means something because it had never happened before. Steven was at his new station, reassigned, as Yura had told her, to a different senior aide on the administrative level. He passed through the logistics hall briefly that morning on an errand. When he saw Rena, he stopped and said, "Good morning." Formally, carefully, the way young people say things when they are still figuring out what they are allowed to feel. Rena said good morning back. Steven nodded and continued on his errand. That was the whole exchange. It was enough. Delegate Yura came by the hall. Before her departure, transport left. She found Rena at her terminal, already halfway through fixing the overnight manifest errors left by the interim Sulhuri manual staff, who had apparently found the human filing system difficult to navigate. Rena had left notes in the margin of each corrected entry explaining what the error had been and how to avoid it going forward. Clear, simple notes. No judgment in the language. Just information. Yura looked at the screen for a moment. "Back to work," she said. "The cargo does not care about the drama," Rena said. Yura almost smiled. She told Rena that the counter-complaint was now part of the permanent interspecies conduct record for the district. Every station operating under the same framework would be required to review their probationary worker policies within the next galactic administrative cycle. It would not fix everything. It would not fix most things immediately. But the record existed now, and records had a way of becoming baselines. "You broke the rules," Yura said. "He broke them first," Rena said. "Yes," Yura said, "but you made sure everyone saw it. That is different from just being right." She left for her transport. Rena went back to the manifests. On the administrative level, Counselor Orith was in her chamber alone, reviewing the full case documentation one final time before archiving it. She was not required to do this. The board had issued its ruling. The case was functionally closed. But Orith had been in this work for 19 years, and she had a habit of sitting with things until she understood them fully. She looked at the footage one more time. Not the slap, the part before it. The 8 months that she had not witnessed, but that Steven's report and the other accounts had reconstructed in careful detail. She thought about the human woman who had stayed late the night before the incident to fix a problem nobody had asked her to fix, who had watched her own work presented by someone else and said nothing, who had been called the wrong name for months and said nothing, who had read the code on arrival and followed it even when the code did not protect her. Orith wrote a note to attach to the archive case file. She addressed it to the conduct board for inclusion in the policy review record. It said, "We designed the rules for species we already understood. We may need to reconsider what patience looks like when it comes from a world like theirs. The capacity to endure is not passivity. We should not have required so much of it before we noticed." She submitted the note, closed the file, and moved on to the next matter. In the logistics hall, Rena sorted cargo. A slow hauler drifted past the station window, the same view she had watched on her first morning and every morning since. She glanced at it briefly. The numbers on her terminal were clean. The haul was running well. She was not counting down the months anymore. She was just working.